All right, so today we have Jordan Wopinski here with us from Little Feet Therapy. And she is going to be sharing some awesome information about gross motor skills and all kinds of things that go along with that. Really shedding some light on it being, I think, more than just what people think when they hear OT and things like that. So I am going to pass it over to you, Jordan. Thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. So as she said, my name is Jordan Wopinski. I am a pediatric physical therapist here in the Charlotte area. And my company that I work for, Little Feet Therapy, we actually come to you. So we travel between daycares, schools, and we also go to patients' homes, which is really convenient. That way you don't have to travel to and from the clinic. And I am lucky enough to work with John Crosland School as well. So if any of you have questions at the end of my presentation today regarding PT services, I'll have my contact information listed for you. Today, we are going to be talking all about gross motor skills and how they're an important factor to consider when it comes to confidence and social interaction among kids and teens. Go ahead. Okay, so we're going to start with the basics. What is pediatric physical therapy and what are some of the benefits? So, physical therapists specialize in improving gross motor skills and development for children ages 0 through 18 years old. We focus on strength, balance, coordination, endurance, and posture and alignment. The overarching goal of a physical therapist is to make a child as physically independent as they possibly can be and to improve their overall quality of life. We work with children with neurologic, genetic, sensory processing, and developmental conditions, but really anyone who has some sort of physical limitation in their daily life could benefit as well. All right. So, I'm sure many of you are familiar with gross motor milestones, but if you're not, essentially they are age ranges where gross motor skills typically develop. Pediatricians will use these milestones in order to track your child's development, and they kind of use it as a guide for recommending different services such as OT, PT, and speech. We, as physical therapists, also use these milestones when tracking a child's progress with therapy and also determining what types of services and how frequent they need those services. I've listed some of the main ones here for reference, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with the skills on the next page, as those are more relevant for school-aged children. And then keep in mind, some of these age ranges can vary depending on the source that you get it from. The ones here are mostly from the CDC website because that is kind of the standard that most pediatricians will go by. However, there is a few discrepancies because they've been updated over the last few years. And so now some of the skills it shows like the later side of the normal range that you'd expect. For example, where it says 18 months walking independently, that doesn't mean that at 18 months, if your child isn't walking independently, then the pediatrician would refer you to physical therapy. It more so means that around like 15 months, the pediatrician wants to see skills that are indicative of you learning to walk, such as pulling to stand and cruising along furniture. And if those skills aren't showing earlier, they'll recommend physical therapy so that by 18 months, your child is walking independently. So there's a little discrepancies there, but keep in mind, most of these are like the later end of that normal range that we're looking for. Okay, so give me one moment. All right, so Starting with 2 to 3 months, you want to see that your child is able to lift their head off of the floor when they're laying on their belly. And then when they're laying on their back, can they just kind of generally move their arms and legs around? Between 4 and 6 months, can they purposefully reach for toys and grab their feet while they're laying on their back? Can they push up onto their elbows during tummy time and look around? Can they sit with support from their arms? So if they're sitting, can they kind of put their arms on the floor to hold themselves up? And then can they roll from their belly to their back? Between 9 and 10 months, we're looking for them to be able to sit up from the floor by themselves and then maintain that sitting position without that arm support. And then I've placed a little asterisk by crawling on hands and knees because when the CDC did recently update their milestones, they removed that as one of the necessary skills that they're looking at. And I get questions from parents all the time about this one because, for the most part, and I'm going to speak generally, PTs don't agree with that. Crawling is usually a very important skill. It helps work on your full body coordination, strength, mobility, and it really helps prepare for walking. Um, at some point, when a child goes from sitting to standing up, they're going to have to transition through the hands and knees position. So I still place some sort of emphasis on it, even though technically it's not on that CDC list, and some pediatricians won't really put a lot of emphasis on it. And yes, some children won't crawl, but that's definitely not the norm. So just something to keep in mind there. And then going from 12 to 15 months, can they pull up into standing? Can they cruise? So walking side to side while holding on to furniture? Can they stand without support? And then can they walk a few steps? So, like we said, some of those emerging walking skills. And then at 18 months, they should be fully walking independently. And then by 24 months, which is 2 years, can they run, take a few steps backwards, jump, just a little jump with 2 feet, go up and down the stairs without help, and then kick, catch, and throw a ball. Okay. All right. And then some of these are older age ranges and some higher level skills. Um, I know that the majority of the kids attending John Crosland are over 5 years old, but I did want to kind of place an emphasis on some of these skills, as some of the details of them can be a little bit overlooked during that 3 to 5 year old age range, especially if during that time your child has maybe a more significant limitation in a different area, whether that's fine motor skills with occupational therapy or communication skills with speech therapy. Sometimes during those age ranges, more emphasis is put on those skills, and some of these can be a little bit overlooked. Um, and then if some of those higher skills aren't obtained, it can kind of show later down the road when they are a little bit older, just with different like playground activities, sports activities, things like that. So at 3 years old, we're expecting a child to be able to balance on one foot for at least 3 seconds, walk like an adult. So instead of, walking where they kind of look like a toddler or a baby with their arms up, are their arms swinging by their side? Do they have more of a narrow walking pattern? They can reach up and walk on their tiptoes. Then by 4 years old, can they go up and down the stairs with one foot on each step? So alternating their feet. Can they balance on one foot for 10 seconds? That's a big one. Walking on a line, like a pretend balance beam. Skipping, galloping, and doing jumping jacks. Then when we get to 5 years is when things get even trickier. So hopping on one foot, doing hopscotch, jumping sideways, kicking a ball 12 feet, throwing a ball 12 feet, and generally kind of hitting a target. catching a ball using only their hands versus kind of trapping it against your chest, jumping over a 10-inch hurdle, jumping forward 36 inches, jumping and turning 180 degrees, and doing 3 sit ups. Now, I have a few of the criteria underlined because often a parent will say, well, I know, my child can throw or they can jump, but the specific parameters and criteria that we're looking for um, tends to be a little bit more than maybe they're thinking. So, just throwing a ball a few feet is very different than 12 feet and towards a target. And being able to kind of bounce and hop around on your feet is very different than jumping over a hurdle, jumping and turning, and things like that. So I like to underline those just to kind of, signify the specific parameters that we're looking for at that age. Um, and if a child is having difficulty with any of these skills, you might see them start to become disinterested or fearful of, climbing around on the playground. Some of that equipment might be a little challenging or a little scary for them. They might be less confident in these skills compared to some of the other kids in their classroom. And so then they might start to opt out of some of those recess games. And like I said, climbing around in the playground, just because, they don't have that confidence and they're a little fearful in their ability. And so it may not be something as simple as, my child doesn't like sports or they don't really care for physical activity. That could just be kind of disguising their lack of confidence in that ability. So moving on. Sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. All right. So outside of those gross motor milestones that we were talking about, there are a few other factors that physical therapists look at that can contribute to any sort of physical limitation or difficulty with those skills that we talked about. And this could be a number of things. It could be just the posture that they like to sit or stand in. It could be their skeletal alignment. It could be some sort of hip or core weakness. They could be a toe walker. All of those different things are things that we're also looking at outside of those milestones to see if we can improve in some of those areas. So if we look at the picture in the top middle, that is a picture of what I would call poor ankle stability. Those ankles are really rolling in, and some, stray from perfectly upright is normal. But I think in these pictures, it shows a pretty significant ankle roll inward. And any sort of decreased support from your ankle can lead to issues with balance, and it can alter the different forces that you're putting through your muscles from your feet up and kind of change your body mechanics with different movements. So, with something like that, a physical therapist might consider something as simple as like a shoe insert just to kind of give a little bit more arch support. Or if they need a little bit more stability, there are rigid braces called SMOs, and those stop right above the ankle, and those can be really helpful to children who have low muscle tone, poor ankle stability, and just give them a little bit more assistance than an insert could provide. And then there's also something called an AFO, which is also a rigid brace like an SMO, but it travels farther up and stops right before the knee. And so it goes a little bit higher. And those can be useful also for kids with ankle and foot instability, but usually more with kids with higher muscle tone if they're standing with knee hyperextension. So if your knee arches backwards instead of bending forward more when they're standing. And AFOs can also be helpful for kids who are toe walkers, and that we can dive into a little bit more later. Moving on to the picture on the bottom left, that is what we call a W sit. And a lot of times that will present in children who maybe have some hip or core weakness, and or they could just be having like a forward slumped or a swayed back posture, which is the picture right above it. Any of those different postures can be indicative of some sort of weakness or joint restriction. And so definitely something we as physical therapists like to look at as well. And outside of just sitting and standing posture, a weakness in your core strength could limit a child's ability to do activities like climb, hang from the monkey bars, ride a bike, and even with their endurance for sitting up in class for a long time, you might see them, after a certain amount of time get antsy and have to shift around a little bit. So that's definitely something to consider. And then also kind of going off of that posture and alignment, we will do a full assessment in standing to see if anything about the way that their skeletal body is aligned, because anything from normal can have just a different pull on your muscles, and it can change the efficiency of how your muscles expend energy. And to me, that seems like common sense, but I know that can be kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around. So I wanted us all to just do a little activity to kind of make that connection. So if you're sitting in your chair, I want you to just like slouch forward, sit in what you would consider is really bad posture, and then try to raise your arms above your head. A little bit tricky. Then if you sit up nice and tall and try to lift your arms above your head, usually for most people, myself included, I can lift way higher above my head and I feel way less strain in my shoulder and back muscles. And I use that as an example to kind of signify how different postures can play into just your everyday life and range of motion and your ability to perform certain motions. So just something to keep in mind there. And then lastly, the picture that's kind of there in the middle, it got cut off a little bit, so I apologize, is a picture of a child toe walking. This is also something that physical therapists always recommend working on, even if it is purely sensory related, which is very common, meaning there isn't necessarily like a tight calf muscle, but a child is looking for a little bit more sensory input and they stand on their toes, often when they're excited or getting some sort of stimulation from that. Even if that's the case and they are able to regulate those sensory needs and get down onto a flat foot, we still recommend therapy, because after walking on their toes for so long, a child won't have like that motor coordination to heel toe walk. They won't just inherently know how to do that. Um, and we also recommend to address it because even when they're young, if there's not a tight calf muscle, that doesn't say that down the road, after years of walking on your toes, that calf muscle is not going to get tight. And that can also lead to foot pain, back pain, and sometimes even a little bit of a disformity of the foot where your toes start to spread out a little bit. And so that can cause issues as well. So definitely something we always like to look at, and it can really impact a child's balance as well, because when they're so used to putting all of the weight forward, when they stand with their heels down, they feel a little off balance. So standing still can be a little bit tricky. All right. All right, so moving on to the self-confidence portion. So self-confidence is the belief and trust in yourself and your ability to succeed. So one of the ways that people measure their self-confidence is based on their history of success. So they tried something and they were successful. They challenged themselves and they were able to accomplish what they set out to do. They feel good about their ability to do something. So I wanted to give an example. A while ago, I was working with this boy, and his parents had told me that he was getting ready to transition into the first grade. And they wanted to make sure that physically he was ready to make that transition because in his current daycare class, he was having trouble keeping up with other kids. He was, quote unquote, really clumsy and just didn't have great coordination. And they wanted to make sure that when jumping to that first grade, he wasn't going to fall behind and that he would get engaged with some of those physical activities, because when they had tried to do these things in the past at home, he just kind of was disinterested and said, I'd rather play video games or board games or watch TV, and just kind of was resistant to their efforts. And we all know how important it is to start a good relationship with physical activity when you're younger, because that can carry over into adulthood as well. And when I first started working with this child, even when, trying to gauge what he could and couldn't do, just mentioning some of these skills like hopping and catching and throwing a ball, he would get pretty resistant and kind of shut down because, he had tried these things in the past and either failed or couldn't keep up with his kids and or the kids in his class. And he would say things like, I can't do it, or I don't want to try, it's too hard, even if we hadn't tried it yet. And so, I don't blame him. I can understand how, it's if you're having trouble keeping up with other kids your age and you feel a little bit left out, that would definitely hinder your self-confidence and make you want to avoid those activities because maybe you're embarrassed or you felt ashamed. So, totally understandable, but definitely something that can always be improved upon. And when you, as a child, if you sit out of these activities and remove yourself, you're missing out on different experiences and opportunities to just make friends and have fun. And as a kid, that's so important. And so, kind of tying in that self confidence and how that can affect social interactions as a child. So, during the school day, for the most part, the teacher is teaching, you're watching slides, you're not really encouraged to chat with other kids in your class unless it's some sort of, group project. And so, really, that leaves lunch and recess as their main time to build friendships and have some of those meaningful interactions with their peers. And again, it's easy to understand that if you don't have confidence in your ability to do any of those things, you're going to opt out of Foursquare or tag or climbing or basketball or any of those things. And then if you add on top of that a child who might be neurodivergent and has, difficulty already in social interactions, it can be really challenging to encourage them to gain some of those experiences with the other kids on the playground. So that's why I think it's really important to discover, are there any physical limitations or barriers that are kind of adding into that? And, is there a balance, strength, coordination, and so on, limitation that we could work on that might help improve their want to participate in some of those activities with their peers? Um, and I'm sure it goes without saying how important it is for a child to have those meaningful friendships and interactions when they're a child. But just in case, I wanted to list some of them here. So, social interactions with your peers can help boost your self esteem, your sense of belonging, your ability to resolve conflict and manage your own emotion. It helps with problem solving, of course, your physical health. And then overall, it can change a child's attitude towards school if, they're looking forward to seeing their friend or having that kid in class that they bonded with, one day outside. And, I'm not saying that every child needs to be a star athlete or even play an organized sport, but building that healthy relationship with physical activity will definitely, improve their self-esteem when it comes to their physical ability. And when they're young, that can make the world of difference going into adulthood, and maintaining that habit and routine of being active. Okay. So now, if you're thinking, okay, my child might benefit from some of these things, or some of these things are kind of ringing true, but you aren't really sure where to start, I do have some recommendations. So, first, with families, I always like to recommend an activity where we're not keeping score, there's not a winner or a loser, because the failures won't be so obvious. It's not necessarily I succeeded or I failed. So things like swimming, karate, dancing, horseback riding, things like that are all amazing when it comes to working on your coordination, your balance, your strength, and they all have the options to be group activities and be done in a group setting. So that kind of ties all of that in together. And then if you were thinking, okay, we do some of those activities, but how can I kind of hone in on some of those specific skills, whether that's just at home or with a physical therapist? I always recommend starting small and starting at a level that you know your child will be successful with. Because, if you start small and kind of easy, you're going to give them that history of successes that we talked about. And if you really encourage them and provide some positive reinforcement, that's going to get their buy in. Versus if right off the bat you're trying an activity that's really hard, they'll kind of shut down and they might lose interest. So, like I said, I always recommend kind of starting small, being really encouraging, and then over time, as they gain some of that confidence, you can make it more and more challenging. Going back to the example of that boy that I had worked with previously, one of our goals was to be able to play catch with a friend or a family member. And so, obviously, part of that is learning how to catch a ball. And when we first started, he was about 5. So he would trap the ball against his chest like that. Whereas what's age appropriate is being able to catch with just your hands. And that was really challenging. So we started small. One of the things we did first to make it fun and start small was we would take turns blowing bubbles and then trying to catch the bubbles like by clapping our hands together. And now this may seem silly or really easy, but it does work on the coordination of bringing your hands together and kind of timing that with, trapping something within your hands. And then from there, we went on to just like rolling the ball back and forth on the ground and practicing trapping it with our hands that way. And then when that was super easy, we started with a big balloon. So standing up and just hitting the balloon back and forth to each other and practice catching it. Obviously, a balloon moves a lot slower and is bigger than like a small tennis ball. And then from the balloon, we went from a big ball to a medium ball to a small ball. And once that small ball was easy from 2 or 3 feet, we started kicking it back to a little bit farther away. And, after a few weeks, he was able to catch that small tennis ball from 5 feet away with just his hands, which was our goal. And another thing that I think was really important that we did along the way was include family members. So I encouraged his parents to work on this with him and his siblings at home. That way, there was some carryover. It was a great bonding experience between him and his siblings and his family. And it made it less of, I need to work on this because I'm bad at this, versus, this is a fun activity we're doing with family. And kind of tying it into that third recommendation, one of the things that with this specific child we did, he really loved his grandparents. And whenever they came to visit, it was a big deal. He got very excited. So we made it a point that whenever his grandparents came to visit, he would get special alone time with them without his siblings or parents, and they would play catch. So he wasn't necessarily thinking of, my family wants me to keep working on catch, but more as I get special time with my grandparents, and this is the activity that they chose. And that was really, really motivating for him. So when we did reach our goal after a couple of weeks, you could clearly tell that his confidence had improved in that skill. he, would ask to do that with me versus me kind of having to prompt him to do it. And he had fun with it. He enjoyed it, and he wanted to carry it over to the playground with his friends and with his family. So overall, I would recommend, if you are trying to work on some of these skills with your kids, is start with something fun and start small. Celebrate the wins, big and small. Be really encouraging. Try not to force it or push them too far at once, because you might lose some of that buy-in from them. And then, do things that they want to do with the people they want to do them with. So whether that's their sibling or their parents or a neighbor, whoever, that's really going to help be a motivator. Um, One thing that I always like to talk to parents about, is just something to keep in mind, is that progress is not always linear. We are not always steadily improving at anything in life. There's going to be dips and there's going to be plateaus, and that's okay. I just like to give that a reminder, because sometimes it can be hard to forget that or to remember that. All right. So I wanted to come up with a list of activities that any of you guys could do at home with your kids that work on all of those various skills, that strength, endurance, coordination, balance, and all of these things can in some way help with those milestones that we talked about earlier. And pretty much everything on my lists is little to no equipment, so you don't really have to buy anything. You can kind of DIY most of these activities. So if we start in the top left corner, balloon volleyball is a great way to work on some of that upper body coordination. Obviously not as challenging as a real volleyball because it moves slow. I think in this picture they're using like a pool noodle, so you can really get creative here. And again, like hitting it will work well with timing, but the catching it helps with catching a ball. In the top middle picture, I put bowling in quotes because you can kind of do anything you want with this, but this is an activity I do all the time with kids, to either work on their ability to kick towards a target or throw towards a target. You don't necessarily have to do like the bowling motion. And in this picture, they're doing water balls or water bottles. But one thing that I like to do, I think is a fun game, is I'll take little cones, and let's say we're doing like a puzzle, I will place puzzle pieces under the cone. So when they knock over the cone with the ball, they get that puzzle piece. Or almost like a hide and seek activity, I'll take like a special toy and hide it under one of the cones, and they have to throw it towards the target to try to see where I hit it. So again, with that, you could really do anything. And that can work on kicking or throwing towards a target and still be fun. Then the bottom left activity is a game I like to do a lot to work on balancing on one foot. And I also do this a lot with my toe walkers, which is putting either a small bean bag or a cone or a ring on their foot, and have them lift it up and try to put it into a bucket or place something on top of a cone. And that, helps with balancing on one foot, but without just having them stand there, because obviously that's not very fun. But also for the toe walkers, that helps encourage what's called ankle dorsiflexion, which is lifting your toes upwards, because naturally a toe walker is going to point their toes towards the floor, and whatever you have placed on your foot is going to slide off. So it works on encouraging that motion of lifting up your ankle. And you can really do a lot of different things with this as well. Then the middle picture on the bottom is wheelbarrow races. That's a fun one you can do with a partner or a sibling. And sometimes what I will do, if we're doing like a buildable toy or a toy with a lot of pieces, we'll wheelbarrow walk to one end of the room where I have all of the pieces, and then you can switch, and who's walking and who's holding the feet. And then the other person can go the way back, and they can either build with the pieces that they picked up, or, put the puzzle in place, and so on. And so that's a really great activity. It works on your upper body coordination and strength and your core strength. And then if you're the one holding the feet, it can work on that grip strength as well. And then on the right-hand side, I just put like a DIY obstacle course. I personally do the floor is lava like 5 times a day with different kids because they love it. There is, if you go on YouTube and you type in like the floor is lava song, there is a song where they say, dance. Okay, now the floor is lava. You have to jump to a safe space, or, crawl like a bear, or so on. And so sometimes I'll play that song while we're doing an obstacle course, and that can make it really fun. But really, you can get super creative with any sort of obstacle course at home, whether that's like stepping across pillows that you have on the floor, and if you fall off, you're in the lava. You can, sometimes I'll just put tape on the floor and use that as either like a balance beam or a safe zone that they have to bear crawl or frog jump through. And if they step outside of the tape, they're in the lava, they have to start over. Or like an obstacle course situation, which is that bottom picture. If you step on the feet, you're safe. If you step off of it, you're in the lava. Again, endless ideas with like an obstacle course at home. And then a few more activities. I have scooter races. So those little scooter boards are great because you can either sit on them and push or pull with your legs, or you can lay on your belly and push or pull with your arms. So it can really work any part of your body. And you can also do that with a partner so they can push or pull you around. I've even done things where I'll put toys on top of the scooter, tie a rope to one end, and they practice pulling it in like a rope. And then moving to the middle column here, working on catching. So we talked about like popping bubbles with your hand as a fun, easy way to work on that coordination. Also, those Velcro mitts are really great because one, they're kind of hard to pull the ball off. So it takes a little bit of strength to do that. But also, I know from experience, you can get a pack of those from like the Dollar Tree. And they're just really fun, and it helps work on accuracy and moving your hand to try to track the ball. So that can be a great one. And then the last idea I had for at home is some sort of activity dice cube or game board. You can get like a plain printable paper dice cube just from the internet, and then you could write various activities on it. Or they have free templates that you can get online too that'll just say like bear walk, crab walk, do a sit up, hop on one foot, things like that. And you could either make your own game out of that, or if you're doing just a traditional board game, they have to roll the activity dice cube and the board game dice cube. And before they can move their pieces, they do the activity on the dice. So that can be a fun way to kind of incorporate different things there too. And then with the holidays coming up, we're at that time of year where you're constantly trying to come up with ideas of what to get your kids. And so I wanted to give some gift ideas that can address all of those skills that we've been talking about. So the first one is a jump rope. They make them, ones that can light up, ones that play music, ones that are weighted, depending on different things that your child is interested in. That's a great activity for working on coordination, strength with jumping, all of that. And then like a tricycle or a bicycle is obviously great. That scooter board that I was talking about earlier, those are on Amazon. I think all of this stuff you can find on Amazon. And then the bottom middle picture is like a little target with Velcro balls that stick when you hit them in a certain spot. There are a ton of variations of this you can find online. Some of them have like princesses, some of them have animals, some of them light up, some of them make noise when you hit it. So again, whatever your child is motivated by, they probably have a version of that. A trampoline is so fun, and that can work on jumping and leg strength. But then I saw this was a cute idea. They also have kind of like a tandem trampoline. And then moving to the bowling pins, like we talked about, there's a million ways you could make that at home for free. But if you wanted to buy a little bowling kit, there's tons of options. I know they have ones that are shaped like zoo animals. So again, whatever your child is interested in, they have a version of that you can get for them at home. And then going back to the floor is lava, there is a floor is lava board game where there's like little tiles that you step across the floor to not fall in, and you can kind of incorporate that into your at-home obstacle course. Those little flying discs where you pull the string and you have to try to catch them, that's a great thing to work on catching and just coordination and timing. Cornhole, I know that's a big thing that people love. Again, there's so many variations on Amazon of different backgrounds and different styles. I have one personally that I use that's like a circus. And so each circle has like a different circus equipment on it. Tons of options there. The bottom middle are little spike balls that, depending on your child's sensory needs, they might really be interested in. They also light up. And so those could be fun if you get a bunch of them to practice tossing into a bucket or, throwing over something or hitting a spot on the wall to get the ball to light up. Lots of options you can do with that. If your child is a builder and they really like to make things, on the top right, I don't remember off the top of my head the name of those, but they're little plastic circles that you can connect into any shape that you want. So in the picture there, they made it into more of like a hopscotch kind of pattern, but really that could be used for anything. And they could practice bear crawling through the circles or hopping through the circles, different things with that. And then lastly, this pancake pileup game is one that's not inherently like a gross motor game, but I use it all of the time if I'm trying to encourage doing multiple repetitions of something. So when we talked about the scooter, I'll place all of the pancakes on one side of the room and we scooter back and forth to build the stack. Or I will build an obstacle course and the child has to balance their pancake on the spatula while they walk through the obstacle course without dropping it. And if they drop it, they go back to the start of that part of the obstacle course. I use that a lot if you notice a child has difficulty controlling their body and they just go too fast or they're kind of falling all over the place. Having something to focus balancing can kind of slow all of that down and be really helpful, and it's fun. So I just threw that one on there too. All right. Give me 1 second. Alrighty, so hopefully today I've been able to show you guys how having a good foundation of strength, balance, and coordination can overall improve a child's self-confidence, and how improved self-confidence could lead to just them having more opportunities for social interactions at school and outside of school. And I hope I made the importance of having those interactions clear as well. However, I've left a good amount of time for us to ask questions about anything we talked about today or just anything gross motor related in general. And then if any of you would prefer to just reach out to me directly versus talking over here, I do have my email and phone number, so you can always contact me that way. And again, I work with ages from 18 to 0. So even if it's not your child who attends John Crosland that you're thinking of, maybe a younger sibling, feel free to reach out to me via email as well. And I just want to say thank you guys for your time. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Jordan, I think I was telling you before we officially started that selfishly, I get so much out of these that I get to host every single one. And I mentioned I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son. And my husband and I have just been baffled watching my son as he grows, because it's in some ways, and I don't mean this to sound negative for my daughter, but it's highlighting like, oh, wow, my 5-year-old really can't catch the ball and my 1.5-year-old can. And so I'm like taking notes passionately over here for everything you're saying with like the balloon catching and all of that, because I think it's definitely things we're going to be using at home. I also am a little mad at you because now I'm going to have the Danny Go, the Floor is Lava song stuck in my head all day, because that's another thing that my daughter is obsessed with is Danny Go. And so she'll do those little videos and it's got a whole Floor is Lava. So that's going to be in my head all day. So thank you so much for that.
I apologize. I know I hear it multiple times a day. It's always looping in here somewhere.
Yes. So I am going to stop the recording here in just a second. So if anyone has questions, but before I do that, I do just want to thank you so much for one, the work that you do here with our students already, but also volunteering your time today to share some of this and some great ideas and even Christmas gifts. I think that's just so valuable and helpful. So thank you so much.
Of course, I appreciate that. You guys are great to work with, so I was more than excited to do this today.